Today we're having a very important discussion, and one that's probably going to be pretty controversial, but we're doing it because we have to. In the context of a fantasy medieval adventurer, are throwing knives worth it? Greetings, adventurers. Thank you for joining me here today at Living Anachronism. And I meant that question, like I seriously meant it. Originally, I had a whole video planned for these throwing knives. I got these off of Amazon. They were originally black, and I had a whole thing where I was going to remake them the same as I did with my machete video, and I was going to add them to my kit and practice with them for a long time. And then as I started to actually do that video and do research for that video, I actually, I didn't know whether or not it was worth it to even do that video, but that sparked a whole bunch of questions that we're going to be talking about today. So a lot of the questions that I had, I've since thought about and done research on, so I'm going to share my answers to them, but I do want to hear your answers, and I think that other people will want to get in on the discussion as well. So even if you're part of a community that I'm not part of, that you think would enjoy this video, go ahead and just share it and use it as a conversation starter, because I think this is an interesting topic as both a medieval enthusiast, someone who really likes fighting and weapons, and like a D&D nerd. So that brings us to the first question that I had when researching this, because we know we see this in D&D, we know we see this in movies, and we know we see it in video games, and maybe even it's written about in a book, but I haven't found any first primary historical sources that indicate to me that throwing knives were a thing. That doesn't mean that those sources don't exist, and if they do, please share them. Please share them with us, because I had a really hard time finding anything. And the only thing that I found, the history of throwing knives as a sport, was that the samurai or maybe the ninjas used them, and whenever a source doesn't really even know what it is that they're saying, I'm always a little skeptical, but kunai, like this, they were supposed to be gardening implements, essentially, but they're bigger than this. I think these knives are really small, probably only effective for a couple of feet at that, because otherwise there's just no way to predict, how many times it's spinning through the air. I literally just can't practice after a certain distance. It's only guesswork, and maybe that's just because my technique is bad. That's fair. Maybe it's just practice. But I was not able to find any historical sources to say that throwing knives were a technique that were trained the same way that archery was, or that grappling was. And then after that, the question becomes even if it was done and I just don't know, or would it be effective in the first place? Is it effective? Does anyone use throwing knives effectively in combat today? Recently, there have been a couple videos. I saw one, again, on Warrior Poet Society. A guy named Jason Johnson was teaching how to use throwing knives in a self-defense scenario. He makes a good case for it, but the knives that he's using are far bigger and far heavier than mine. And we'll get into the utility of throwing knives in a little bit as well, because that's another reason why, I'm questioning, is it worth it? Is it worth it to have these? So, do people use throwing knives today in self-defense? At least one person does. In the context of a fantasy medieval adventure, though, it's not gonna, these aren't piercing armor, right? These aren't, and I don't even know for sure that especially something of this weight would effectively penetrate someone, even if they were just wearing regular clothes. If someone chucked this at me, I'd want to dodge it, I wouldn't want to get hit. But that's just an instinctual, if anyone threw anything at me, I would want to get out of the way. It wouldn't be fun to get hit in the face with one of these, but it wouldn't kill you. I don't know if it would take you out of the fight, especially if your adrenaline's going. I just don't know. I'm asking the questions. What do you guys think? So, and then we have the very specific, oh, well, maybe if we're dueling, I can throw a knife and get you in the medieval period. Because if we're dueling, maybe we're not wearing armor or something like it. And that's a very specific thing. And then at that point, isn't it kind of cheating? You would both essentially need to agree to the rules that you're both able to use throwing knives, and then you both know that it's happening. I feel something like this is probably, best saved for a surprise. And if you agree on the weapons because you're having a duel, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's a dart in your arm, there's something to be said for just winning and not being killed that day, but we have to take into account, what it is that they valued in the time period, and what was the purpose of a duel. So, I don't know. That brings us to the utility of these, because as I was preparing my video, You know, I ground all the paint off to try to make them look a little bit more period. I was gonna try to give them leather handles, and then I realized that that would make them harder to throw. Or at least, you know, that's what I figured, so I like didn't do it. I was gonna make little sheaths for them so that I could like attach them all over my body at various angles that would have been conducive to like drawing and throwing in one motion. But I sat down to sharpen them and did research on like, oh, well, how sharp are throwing knives supposed to be, and what is their blade angle supposed to be? Only to find out that they're not. They're not actually knives. They're essentially just they're just pointy things that stick, and they're not supposed to be sharp. At first, I was like, well, they're not really knives then, that's useless. But it also makes sense because as you're chucking them, like, you're not gonna spend all of that time and money potentially if you're not sharpening your own knives to like hone a really nice keen blade just to like waste it, you know? I mean, like, even if you hit your target, like, it's probably gonna be ruined, like a very fine blade. You know, if you miss and you lose it, that's all of your money and investment gone. If you miss and it bounces against something, even if you can pick it up again, like the blade might be destroyed, like irreparably. And then even if you hit, like if it hits against a bone, like it's done. Is this worth it as an investment? Like this is time to learn how to do this very specific skill, and this is money to purchase and then maintain the equipment needed in order to train and then needed in order to use them. Is the cost of both time and money to maintain this as a weapon equal to its effectiveness in combat? I don't think it is. I don't think it is. Not for an adventurer, not when you're going up against people of varying degrees of armoredness, armored ability. This really seems like such a specific weapon, and such a specific skill. You know, if you compare it to, you know, making arrows, like, yes, arrows probably take more people to make because you have to have the person that forges the arrowhead, and you have to have the person that like makes the shafts and then attaches everything, and then you need the fletcher. It takes more people technically, but there's plenty of people that make their own arrows out of various things. Not a lot of people make their own knives. I don't think. I mean, that's an assertion. You know, if you shoot an arrow and you miss, like, not only is it easier, right, to tell what your technique is, like what about your technique is wrong when you're practicing archery, because you can see where you missed and you can see like what angle the arrow hits your target at, and then maybe make adjustments from there. But especially when you're throwing a knife this small, like, I can't tell how many rotations this is making at 10 feet versus 15. Like, I can't count that. It happens too fast. And I know that the idea is to try to limit the number of rotations, but I can't see that. It's just something that I can feel. And then if it doesn't stick and it bounces off somewhere, I have no idea, especially at a certain distance, like, I have no idea how this hit the target. So I can't really amend how it is that it's not the same. It's not the same as shooting with an arrow. It's not the same as practicing with a crossbow. And it's not even as if these have the same utility as a bow or a crossbow, because like, at least you can use a bow or a crossbow to like hunt or something to provide for yourself. Like, especially knives these small. It's literally like 5 feet maybe, and you have a slight distraction. At least that's the way I see it. So the utility of these in terms of an adventuring context, they only have one use, right? They have one purpose, and that is they exist to be thrown. Like, it's not like you could keep one or like sharp or something. You keep them all sharp and like use them as your utility knives, and like when worse comes to worse, you like use them as a weapon. Like, as far as I can tell, they're essentially useless otherwise. Like, I'd almost rather have something like an ice pick that I could throw, because at least an ice pick I can use for other things, like to pry apart knots, which is, I believe, what they used their eating spikes for. I don't know what those are called. I gotta look that up, but we're rambling a little bit, so let's get back on track. So then we asked the question, would you want to throw a knife that you had sharpened, or a dagger that you had sharpened? If the knives were sharpened, like say you had a dagger, like say I had my sax knife and I wanted to throw that, would that be effective? I mean, sure, like especially at a very close distance, and I can do a throw that has no rotation and I know it's going to hit the target. Yeah, you can put some more power behind that. And if you're just, you know, if it's just one guy and you're trying to hit him with a little bit of distance and they're not expecting it, you know, no, sure. I can think of scenarios where throwing a knife would be advantageous, sure. But does that mean that it's worth it to practice that very specific skill that would be used in very isolated scenarios? you know, and then you have to weigh whether or not it's worth it to invest the time to get really good at doing that thing. So good that like it's by muscle memory, like you know you're not going to screw it up and then potentially get yourself killed while you're fighting. Like, is it worth it to invest that amount of time and then the money to maintain a bladed weapon that you're going to be throwing and practicing with? Like, I know I would never practice throwing my Zax knife. I literally just care about it too much, and it was very expensive. Like, I'm not gonna just go chuck it at a tree and let it potentially bounce onto a rock or something. I literally couldn't afford to, like, you know, to lose it. I'm different because my life doesn't depend on that Zax knife, you know, but you know, in the context of a medieval, you know, fantasy adventurer, like, you know, your weapons are what keep you alive, and if you're practicing and they're just like and they're just breaking, like, what are you gonna do? So yes, there are scenarios where I think throwing a knife might be advantageous, but does that outweigh the cost and the time that it would take to maintain and perfect that technique? I don't think so. I really don't think it would. It would really be more of a distraction, or like a last ditch, like, this is the only thing I've got at this point, I think. Let me know what you think about this, because this is a huge thought experiment, and it's something that I went in thinking I would have the answers for it, thinking that, like, you know, this would be effective to some degree, and you know, to some degree it is, but there's so many more factors about it, and there's so little in the way of literature other than to just dismiss it outright, which in and of itself sort of validates, you know, why it isn't done that often, because you know, maybe it's just not that good. And the final thing to consider in the context of the fantasy medieval adventurer, especially if you're not going to keep these in your backpack probably. Like, I would want to keep my throwing knives on me so that I can use them at a moment's notice. And like your belt, and if you're wearing a baldric or something, like, that is your real estate. That is the amount of space that you have, and maybe your boots or something, or your bracers, you know, potentially. But you have a finite amount of space with which you can carry your gear. And the gear that needs to be deployed quickly. And I think there are more effective thrown weapons to begin with. Like, the more mass it has, the more damage it's gonna do, even if you don't hit him with the blade. So I would say if you wanted to have a throwing axe, like, even that, like, these are just too small. You know, maybe it's one of those things that it's like, I'm trying to use it for something it's not intended for. Like, maybe knives that are this small, one, don't make any sense, and they're just a gimmick. Or, if they did exist, they were literally only to be used for distraction. But if that were the case, you could just keep a bag of rocks with you. And then you don't need to worry about losing them or breaking them or something. And they literally might even hurt more. Given that you have a limited amount of space and a limited amount of coin to replenish your gear, are these worth it to keep on your person and sacrifice potentially another pouch for something, or, you know, sacrifice that money that you could use to, you know, get more arrows or something, which I believe have a more utilitarian purpose? What do you think? Do you think throwing knives are worth it? I'm gonna practice with them, because there may be stuff that I'm not considering. You know, it's really easy to just like watch someone else do a thing and then immediately dismiss it because you don't think it will work. And it's really easy to try something once and then easily dismiss it because you don't think it will work. So there might be some people that are watching this that are like, why are we even having this talk? Like, we know it doesn't work. I know it doesn't work. Like what? But you know, I have the time and I'm curious. So that's why we're here. That's why we're doing this. I'm thinking maybe if I can boost their utility by turning knives like this, you know, into some sort of arrows so that they can serve multiple purposes, you know, maybe that would be kind of cool. But I was genuinely curious. Like, they have pervaded numerous elements of pop culture, and you know, is that just because they're cool, or is there actually something about them that's effective? And that's what it is that I'm curious about. If there's stuff that you want me to try and experiment with, either because you don't have the space or you don't have the knives, and you're curious about something, go ahead and drop a comment below, because you know, I'm honestly stumped by this one. Go ahead and share the video, use it as a conversation starter. So thanks for watching the video today, guys. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next week. Good luck on your adventures.